Uh, Greetings, everybody. I'm Sean Costigan, Managing Director of Resilience Strategy at Redsift. I'm here today with Gareth Packham, Director of Information Security and Data Protection at Save the Children International. Gareth is Director of Information Security and Data Protection at Save the Children International and is responsible for delivery of the organization's IT security and its data protection management functions. Gareth is also the Chief Information Security Officer at Save the Children Association, where he's responsible for supporting and enhancing members' own information security programs. And he's also part of the NCSC's Charity Sector Trust Group. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that organizations that are nonprofits and charities have throughout the world, and we're going to dig into Gareth's experience running the security program for Save the Children International. So thank you very much, Gareth, for the time and energy that you bring to this role. Could you tell us a little bit about Save the Children International?
You're welcome, and thank you, Sean. Yes, so Save the Children is one of the world's largest not-for-profit organisations. We are the world's largest not-for-profit dedicated to improving the lives of children around the world. As a movement, Save the Children is over 100 years old. Save the Children International is a large organisation, over 18,000 staff, operating in over 100 countries worldwide. We specialise in delivery of international humanitarian programming, so children's health, children's education, speaking up for children in parts of the world where they don't have rights or they don't have a voice. Probably what we're best known as is sort of disaster response in emergency situations. So yeah, pleased to speak to you today, Sean.
It's quite something. Thank you, Gareth, for that. And yeah, it's quite an organization. And once you start to look at it, and I encourage everybody who listens to this or watches this video to take a good look at what the good work that Save the Children is doing. So, we hear about them all the time. We've become to the point where it's sort of the daily drumbeat of cyber attacks against all sorts of different organizations, and nonprofits and charities are no different in that regard. I think that they suffer from many of the same ills that we all do with regard to cybercrime. I think one of the instances that I'd like to just kick off with, and one of the concerns, I think, is the ever-present issue of ransomware and the sort of phishing scams that you're dealing with. But before we get into greater detail, I think it would help us all to just think broadly about what the challenges are that you see nonprofits dealing with, and where you think that is there anything unique in this space with regard to nonprofits, or what's the...
I think in some ways there's some unique challenges. I think the challenge for not-for-profits and charitable organisations is that they face many of the same cybersecurity threats as any organisation, be that a multinational Fortune 500 organisation or an SME. But the difference is the exposure is the same, but often budgets and resources are significantly less than a similar sized organization might be in say, the financial services sector or fast moving consumer goods or something like that. So in essence, you've got to do as much or more with less. And that's a challenge. And I think in some ways, there's some evidence that attackers know that, and that rightly or wrongly, not-for-profit organizations are perhaps seen as an easy target. And we know criminals are criminals, and they're not bound by morals or ethics, and many of them have absolutely no concerns about targeting a charity because, like any organization, they have data they're concerned about. We have systems and that we want to keep online and operational. So I think it's not unique in that sense, but definitely a challenge for not-for-profits.
Yeah.
And as far as Save the Children is concerned, because we operate globally, we operate in parts of the world where there's conflicts or political turmoil, we have the added challenge of all of those kind of threats that any large enterprise has. So phishing, ransomware, cyber extortion, denial of service, and data exfiltration attacks. But we also have interest from state actors, whether surveillance of some of our high-profile members of staff, whether trying to find out data about some of the children and families we work with in parts of the world, particularly internally displaced people and refugees. So yeah, we have some quite unique challenges in that regard.
Yeah, no, that is very unique. I mean, insofar as if you just think about the nexus of, some organizations, face primarily only cyber criminal activity, and others, to think that you have both state actors, advanced persistent threats, and the, lingo of the cybersecurity community, in addition to, and then the distributed challenge that you describe of, being everywhere in the globe. So many of the breaches and attacks seem to that are affecting nonprofits seem to be focused on a recognition of cyber criminals that they're doing reputational damage in some way, that they're affecting an organization and its ability to deliver trusted services. And how do you see that shaping up with regard to nonprofits over the last couple of years? We've seen some notable attacks. I was thinking about the Red Cross breach that happened in 2021 and really wasn't revealed until 2022, only because Red Cross didn't have the resources or the availability to know that they had in fact been breached. But it affected over 500,000 people, and I imagine did some reputational and harm damage to the organization at the same time. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it's reputational damage is definitely a huge concern of mine, and I know it's the same for CISOs and a lot of not-for-profit organizations, because although we don't have customers in the classic sense that a retail group or financial services group might in that sense, we do have donors, we do have partners and supporters that we work with, and they entrust us with their money in the form of donations and fundraising, and we have personal information on those individuals. And anything damaging in the press around certainly any accusations of not safeguarding PII or personal data sensibly or securely enough are hugely damaging, and people only have a finite amount of money to spend in terms of donations and giving to good causes. And you do wonder on what level something in the press, maybe even subconsciously, if I have a choice between charity A and charity B, and I've seen something bad about charity A in the press, you're more likely to give that to charity B. And I think there's both that from perception of fundraising, but also from partners, not-for-profit, certainly Save the Children, but also I think a huge number of not-for-profit organizations commonly work in partnership, both with governments, with other non-profit organizations or social impact enterprises. And I think any reputational damage would deter those partners from working with them. There would be concerns. And I think in that sense, much in the same as someone supplying goods to a commercial organization might end up losing customers as a result of a breach, you just say, well, I don't trust you with my data. There is a real chance that the partners may not want to work with an organization if they've suffered a data breach and are found to have been at fault. So yeah, it's definitely a big concern.
Yeah, the donor and the partner issues there are clear to me. I think that the issue too is that, with regard to ransomware, we sort of kicked that off, initially before we even got recording on this call, just thinking about what the, effects might be of payouts, right? Again, if an organization decides to, because of one reason or another, that they have to make a payout, that would become public knowledge, presumably. And then again, reputational damage could be real at that point. You wouldn't want to give it to an organization that just is in turn handing it over to the cyber criminals because of some, oftentimes basic issue that hadn't been handled. So, with regard to sort of the operational side of this for the CISOs out there who are going to be paying attention to it, what do you think what's your best advice for, keeping the digital estate secure against the ever-present threats that you're seeing now? And how would you prioritize the efforts as an active CISO in this? I mean, it's got to be a daily grind for you, and I'm curious. Yeah.
It is, Sean, and I could give a very lengthy answer, but for the sake of anyone watching, I won't go into too much detail. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's about having a recognized cybersecurity program. I think having dedicated resource, both in terms of a team, that doesn't have to be a huge team, and obviously an organization's cybersecurity program and resource needs to be sensible on what's affordable, on what's practical for an organization that size. But I think dedicating resource, having an information security program looking at different aspects of cybersecurity, whether that's aligned to something like the NIST, US National Institute of Standards Technology cybersecurity framework, or ISO 27001, which probably a bit too time demanding for smaller not-for-profit organizations, but a framework of some description to help guide that information security program and to make sure that you're achieving both a risk-based approach to information security, but also a balanced approach. And I think certainly in my career, there's been a big shift away from that castle and moat model of trying to stop people coming in at all costs. Yes, you need to be sure of defense, but also making sure that you dedicate resource and time and attention to what does recovery look like? What does the response to a cybersecurity incident, and what does recovery look like for an organization of different sorts. And I think regardless of your size or the sector you operate in, having that defense in depth, having that almost like an assume breach mentality, so that you have a prepared incident response plan, you test that, you know where your data is backed up and how you can recover from that is really important. I think it's also important to make sure that your senior management team, whether that's a board of governors or trustees, are aware of the cyber risk landscape and aware of what, as a cybersecurity function, you can and can't do, and that matches the organization's risk tolerance and risk appetite in that space. And I think that comes on to what I said about a risk-based approach to information security. I think it's even more important in the not-for-profit sector, where there is definitely a finite amount of money that can be spent. There's lots of competing demands for investment and revenue within an organization. You can't protect everything all the time across an organization, but an organization needs to understand what its crown jewels are, where its most critical data, where are the data and the systems that, if they're compromised, if data's stolen, or they're taken offline, that's going to have the biggest impact on the charity. And that could be through reputational damage, that could be through operations, that if you're a charity that does a lot of its service provision online and you're offline for a month, well, you're not meeting your charitable aims, you're letting down your sort of beneficiaries and the people you work with. So I think understanding what those risks are and impacts are really key. And I think although any cybersecurity program should be able to aspire to defense in depth, it's a challenge when you have limited budgets. Not-for-profits aren't the same as a multinational financial services organization, where they can buy pretty much every tool under the sun and have 2 or 3 overlapping technologies for each area. I think a not-for-profit needs to be able to show value in any cybersecurity investment, and you have to really think wisely about that tooling. You can't afford everything that's new and shiny. So when you do invest in technology, it needs to be effective, but it also really needs to deliver value for money. And I think for any organization, endpoint security is still important. People download malware from websites, from software packages, clicking on emails and things like that. So it's still important to look at endpoint detection and response, or extended detection response if you have that capability. I think any organization, not-for-profit or otherwise, really needs to look hard at email security, particularly around preventing phishing and business email compromise attacks, but also, and I'm sure we might come on to it, around managing things like DMARC and DKIM and DNS and the sendability and reputation of emails that go out. And I think finally, as I touched on before, around backup and recovery, making sure that in the event something does happen, whether that's ransomware or wiperware, that you know your data is secure, that it's segregated, and that you can restore it. I think a lot of organizations rely on, particularly small organizations, 1 or 2 people in IT who say, do you back it up? And they nod, yeah, we back it up. Right. Have you tested that? Do you know that actually you can restore those systems and bring them online in whatever kind of recovery time objective you've set? And I think they're probably some of my key recommendations in that space.
Well, thank you, Gareth, because there's quite a few points there that I'd like to pick up, particularly, understanding cyber as enterprise risk. First of all, you also mentioned crown jewels, and that got me salivating, because there's one of my favorite quotes. That McGeorge Bundy, who was the national security advisor for Kennedy and for the Johnson administration, once said that if you guard your toothbrushes with equal zeal as your diamonds, you will end up with more toothbrushes and fewer diamonds. And the point of that is something that we just need to take away, right? That we do have crown jewels, or all organizations do, and it might be data, right? It probably is for the nonprofits and for the charity world. And that's getting to the heart of that is an enterprise risk discussion from my perspective. So can you tell us how you've been successful in getting that across to your organization, which also I think ultimately comes down to resourcing, right? It all kind of these pieces come together, and then you picked up quite a bit on security culture, so I'm not going to forget about that, because I think there's quite a bit there before we get into some of the technical details. So tell us a little bit about how you alter the enterprise discussion around risk.
Yeah, no, happy to, Sean. And I think for me, the key part of information risk and enterprise risk management is moving it out of the domain of just IT and information security. Yes, we're experts on, we can come up with a long list of all the bad things in the world, phishing, ransomware, malicious threats, but actually we're not responsible for a number of the assets. We don't understand the value of those assets in the organization. So what I do in any organization I've worked in is shift that over to whether you call it the business or sort of the functional side of the organization and say, look, we can support you. We're experts in managing risk, and we can help you reduce risk. But we need you to help us understand that risk. What here are what we think are your assets. Is this broadly right? How
Mm.
would you value those? What is the impact if a nation state got hold of this, if a cyber criminal got hold of this, or this system that you're running here, if that was offline for 3 days, 6 days, 6 weeks, what would the impact be? And then I think once you've had those kind of conversations, you start to understand the impact of these risks. It's a lot easier to have those risk-based discussions to say, okay, well, actually, out of our list of assets or sort of silos of information assets, we're not too worried about these. Yeah, we'd rather they weren't compromised or stolen, but we've got 2 or 3 key groups, and it might be sort of fund donor data, our HR data, and certainly PII that of the beneficiaries, the people that the charity, not-for-profit organization works with. This is where we really need to focus our attention. These are where we need to make sure we have appropriate technological controls in place. And we covered that a few minutes ago around email security, around endpoint detection and response and backup. But also then at that point, looking at the kind of organizational controls, which is often sit with the business. Who has access to this? Do you really need 200 people to have access to everything that's in that database?
Right.
Do you really need to be keeping 10 years of data when actually you're only ever reporting on the last 2 or 3? And things like that. And then you can start to have more meaningful conversations and reduce the risk appetite through that way. So I think, in short, enterprise risk management needs to be a joined up endeavor between the technical functions who understand risk, but also the business that are actually owning that risk and are responsible largely for the impacts. And I often, when I'm talking to people about asset owners, there's lots of jargon around. You can be an asset owner or an information asset owner or a data custodian and things. But I generally say to people, if something goes wrong with something, who does the buck stop with? That's typically the risk owner or the asset. That's the owner. Who's going to get called in front of the audit and risk committee to explain that? And that always helps you find the risk owners in that space.
Yeah, no, that's notable and useful. Great practical advice as well. And I think, there's a point at which all organizations, I think, have to begin grappling with what sort of framework, you mentioned them, or what sort of information management security system you're going to put in place. In the people, process, technology side of it, the process side of it is so crucial. I think, where do you think they should start? I mean, do you start with NIST? Do you start with something like just going out and looking at guidance, or do you invest your precious resources in something that's, maybe even, more costly and timely, like the ISO 2700, which, has many merits, but gets right to the heart of the risk issue, right? And who owns risk, and it goes all the way to the top. So, can you tell us where you'd recommend people start with?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think to a certain extent it depends on where you already have knowledge. So if someone in your information assurance or information security team is experienced in ISO 27001 and you've got a head start in that space, it's a great standard. I've worked with a number of organizations to gain ISO 20001 certification, but I think there is a level of buy-in with ISO 27001 of how much resource you need to dedicate to that, because there's certain artifacts that go alongside an information security management system. I think NIST, for me, and certainly in Save the Children, our information security framework has moved to alignment with the NIST framework, because I think it's an easy framework to explain to technical people within both the IT and the information security function. But I think seniors get that model more readily than something like ISO 27001, because trying to explain what an information security management system is sometimes is quite taxing to someone who's never worked in a compliance setting or never worked on a framework. Whereas this cybersecurity framework of those domains of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, people get that. Okay, so I need
And
to sort of,
govern, the new one, govern, which helps a
and
great
govern.
deal.
Yes, I forgot. Yes, I forgot the revision,
Yeah.
govern on the end. But people get that. It's more common sense. Yeah, I suppose I need to know where my assets are. I want to do what I can to protect. I want to find someone doing bad things if I can, whether they're inside my organization or out. I need the ability to respond to that, whether that's with my own team or a third party doing that. And I need to recover, and I need to have appropriate governance in place to make sure. And I think that's a lot more readily understandable. I mean, one thing I often speak to my own team about is not to get too het up around which framework you choose, because you could lose weeks, if not months, of your life thinking about COVID, about NIST, about CIS top 20. And actually, when you look at them, yes, they may call things slightly different names.
Yeah.
But there's a core kind of set of key controls: MFA, endpoint security, data security, communication and network security, incident response. They're all in there. Yes, it might be different terminology. So just pick one that's right for your organization. Even something in the UK, we have the cyber essentials, cyber essentials certification. It is a minimum. It is a minimum cybersecurity, and it's quite focused on technical security. It doesn't look a lot at risk assessment and incident response, but it's a good start. That actually, if you've deployed those controls, you're at a level considerably above many other, certainly small to medium enterprises, in doing so. So I think find something that works for your organization, your existing business practices, and work through that.
There's no harm in starting with the basics. I mean, too many organizations that we talked about again earlier today, aren't doing the basics all that well. And how do you, without naming and shaming, which also seems to have not, always, produced the results that we'd like, I think. What do you suggest? I mean, we see so many organizations that are being hit with critical vulnerabilities that could have been patched, or varieties of things that they could have done. How do you commend to their attention the necessity of just doing the basics well, multi-factor patching, so that you get out of the most shallow, the low-hanging fruit, I guess, is the best analogy here, that the cyber criminals are particularly after. What do you think? Are there information sharing groups in the nonprofit world that really help get people's attention in this space?
Yeah, I think it's things like this, Sean, about webinars and information security awareness around that. It is a huge buy-in to do those kind of essential controls.
It's not hard,
and it's probably slightly out of date now. But I think there's a statistic from Microsoft, I think a few years old, but around, I think 98% of incidents would have been avoidable if multi-factor authentication would have been deployed across the organization. That's probably dropped a little bit now compared to some of the novel attacks.
But we have celebrated
but just sharing.
Attacks. Sorry. I mean, in the United States, just the Change Healthcare, which was a massive payout and affected, many millions of Americans, was due to lack of multi-factor authentication, from what I can understand now. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, I think it's about illustrating the impact through narrative, through information sharing, through case studies. I mean, certainly what I've seen over the last year is that the speed of attacks has really changed. And I think people do need to be more aware of, it doesn't really matter what your size is, and whether or not you're being targeted by nation states. I think it's gone now from where a 0-day vulnerability is reported. The average time for a live exploit is under 24 hours. Is under 24 hours now, which is just unbelievable compared to 12 months ago or 24 months ago, where that was days, if not weeks, then a few years ago where that was months sometimes before an exploit becoming published. And then people, because you can download exploit kits on the dark web, and you can be up and running looking for that exploit as soon as possible. So I think in answer to your question, it's awareness, it's reaching out to groups in your sector. I think certainly the not-for-profit sector, NCSC, in the UK, offer resources specifically for not-for-profit organizations. There are other sector-specific organizations around focused on sharing knowledge and sharing threat intelligence information on that. But I think you
Yeah.
need to be receptive to what the impact on your organization is and how likely these attacks are. Now they're
Right.
not black swan events anymore.
They're not.
People,
They're not.
not for profits of all sizes, are seeing attacks regularly. And
Yeah.
yes, that's a bad thing, but it's happening.
It's
I
happening.
think
Yeah.
people do need to
And
be
we can.
alive to that.
Yeah, if we talk, I'm sure you're aware. So just a couple of weeks ago in the United States, the FBI and the State Department and NSA and others came together and made an advisory about North Korea's attacks that were really taking advantage of nonprofits and think tanks in particular, and using DMARC, right? And DMARC exploits, which I think are very interesting, for us to consider here, and we can talk about it in some greater detail. But the upshot of it was that they were able to take advantage of these vulnerabilities, and then do advanced spear phishing, right? And the effort for North Korea is usually to be able to generate hard currency. And so this was yet, but the victim here isn't just the person who gets tricked into it, but it's also the nonprofits and the organizations who either weren't aware of or didn't take advantage of the opportunities that something like DMARC would offer them. So can you tell us a little bit about what that experience has been for you with regard to dealing with DMARC, trying to square away and secure that email vulnerability, the crucial trusted email vulnerabilities that are out there? So
Yeah, no, of course, Sean. So probably around 18 months, 2 years ago, we were alarmed by started to become alarmed by the increasing number of email-based attacks, both traditional phishing, spear phishing, also reports of sort of brand impersonation from a number of organizations impersonating Save the Children, trying to get people to donate to fake sites to effectively to directly to criminals. And we thought about what did we want to do to address that, because it was posing a risk both to our organization itself, to our financial stability. We transfer large amounts of money around the world. Any financial crime like that can have a big impact, but also around our supporters. And going back to what we said before about the reputation of the organization, rightly or wrongly, people probably, if they were the victim of that crime, may hold us responsible for that and think, well, surely there's more you can do. And we know as cybersecurity professionals, it's actually really challenging sometimes to do that. And even taking a fake website down can take time, and it can take resource. So there were a number of different sort of elements to looking at email security, including training and awareness. So we started to do simulating phishing campaigns. We launched specific modules on phishing awareness, helping people spot that. We invested in email security, both around that sort of inbound email, but also around managing DMARC. And it had been something on our kind of enterprise to-do list for quite some time. It's quite challenging technically to get it right, and that's when we realized actually we couldn't afford to keep waiting for sufficient time and attention to fix it. So we went out to market looking for tooling and services to support us in that DMARC journey, and ended up as a customer of Redsift.
Yeah. No, that's very, very helpful. And I think that's one of the things that I see consistently, and I'm sure you do too, is that there are ways to handle many of them. Maybe it's not 98% of the issues. Maybe it's only 80% of the issues, but DMARC is just one of the best ways. And you mentioned domains as well and domain protection. Do you see an increase in fraudulent spoofing domains that are affecting nonprofits broadly, not just your own? And is that because it's back to the democratized ability of cyber criminals to be able to take advantage of all the kits and spin up something using your own intellectual property, your own copyrighted images, et cetera, to be able to? Is that something that's recognized in the nonprofit community as an increase?
Definitely, certainly from our experience at Save Children International, we are seeing an increase both in kind of that targeted business email compromise type attack, but also brand impersonation. Search engines are quite good, and actually it can be really difficult as an organization to keep all of your assets like that secure, whether it's the forms, and those kind of spoofed websites, those spoofed emails have got better, and I suppose
the big fear with
as
AI that they'll get better still.
yeah, and
right?
I was about to say that, yes, lots and lots of stories, scare stories about AI, but I think that there's a lot of research coming out of from Microsoft, some from CrowdStrike I read the other day, around beginning to see hard evidence of generative AI being used, both in speeding up, sort of, trying not to use jargon, OSINT, speeding up open source intelligence work and reconnaissance, but also strong indication that groups are beginning to use them to generate content for fake websites, for
Scan
phishing
for
emails.
vulnerabilities. Right.
And it's natural. Criminals have always adapted technology and techniques that make their life easier. That's that in a heinous way, they want to be as efficient as possible at ripping people off and making money, and they'll use whatever tools they can to do that. So it's an increasing challenge.
It's a rational enterprise on their side too, right? They have limited resources and limited people, and they want the maximum payout. So unfortunate, what their ends are, but the means are, it's interesting. And as you mentioned too, I think a lot of the early talk about AI was speculative, but it's interesting to watch now in real time as you see some of this come out and get better data around it. So on that, any notes, any future sort of optimistic notes that you'd like to share with the security community? I know it's hard to do when we think so much about risk and security, but what would you have us?
I'm a positive person by nature, Sean, and I think you only need to go along to a major cybersecurity exhibition now and see how many thousands, if not tens of thousands, people are attending, to know that actually the world is waking up to the cost of cybercrime and the battle to do that. And actually, some of the technologies that we now take for granted in terms of things like endpoint detection and response, 10 years ago, that was almost seen as a nice to have. People had very basic antivirus, if that. Particularly not-for-profits where they probably had nothing, or they might have been running a free version of an antivirus tool. And I think there has been a shift, not-for-profits. And I think if you park the ethics and things around, why should a not-for-profit have to pay for cybersecurity? Well, because you do. That's the world we live in. Unfortunately, I think boards and teams are waking up to the fact that, criminals will not only not care if we're a charity, they may deliberately target us. And that, unfortunately, not-for-profits do have to take action. I think they're beginning to do that. I think they're beginning to do that. I know a lot of vendors are very supportive of not-for-profits and offer very competitive commercial rates on products and that. So I think sometimes not-for-profits are scared of discussions with technology vendors because they feel everything is going to be completely out of their price range and they're not going to be able to afford anything. And I think that's, and I've worked at not-for-profit organisations of different sizes, and I think that's untrue, particularly now with the move to sort of cloud-based cybersecurity services. That, well, that doesn't always do me as a favour as a CISO of an organisation with 18,000 people, where you're buying solutions where you've only got 40, 50 users, for instance. Actually, some of those are really competitive. Some of those are really competitive on a subscription-based model and affordable for any organisation. So, I think it will be a constant battle between cyber criminals and cybersecurity professionals. But I'm positive. I think we're moving in the right direction.
On that positive note, maturity is increasing, and that's wonderful to hear. So, Gareth, I really want to thank you for the time and energy that you bring to this, and the great conversation that we've been able to have. So, with that, thank you.
You're welcome. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Sean.